Heyo YouTube, Flowcat here, and it is time for How Do I Kazuha. I've been looking forward to making this for a long time because Kazuha is my favorite unit in the entire game. I C6 triple crowned him the day he came out, and no regrets. Not a lot of people really pulled on his banner the first time around. He wasn't very popular until after his banner went away, but I saw his value from the very beginning, and I'm super excited to share with you guys how to optimize your Kazuha, as well as show you some interesting team ideas for those of you who may be looking to acquire him in the future, whenever that may be. With no further ado, let's jump into it and examine his kit. Alright, here we are in Genshin Impact, and this is my Kazuha. We're going to talk about his talents first, and then I'll show you what my Kazuha specifically does. First up, we have his auto attack sequence, which consists of a surprising number of strikes. It says 5 strikes, but if you count them up, it's actually 8 strikes. This is fantastic for anyone who boosts normal attack damage like Yunjin. Now, the plunge is extremely important here, but we'll come back to that in a minute. His charge attack is a rather standard charge attack, but it actually does do 2 strikes, which is kind of cool. Kazuha's E has a tap and a hold version. The tap version causes him to hop into the air and sets him up for his plunge attack. So you use his elemental skill and then you do an auto attack midair to cause him to plunge to the ground. The hold is the same as the tap, except you jump a little higher and it has a wider AoE on the initial strike. Kazuha's E can be used midair, so you can jump first before using the tap version, not the hold version. An interesting function of his E is that if it comes in contact with an element, it'll absorb and infuse his attack with that element for when he plunges. Note that infusion priority does matter here. And lastly, we're going to talk about Kazuha's burst. It's a very standard kind of AoE domain expansion kind of burst. It lasts 8 seconds, costs 60 energy, and has a 15-second cooldown. This burst can also infuse, similar to his E, or like Venti's burst if you're familiar with that. And he has 2 Ascension talent passives. One of them is the one we already talked about, which allows his E to infuse with an element for his plunge. And the other talent passive is the one that everyone goes crazy for. It causes his elemental mastery to turn into an elemental damage bonus for any element that he swirls, and this buff applies to every member of your team. Finally, he has a passive talent that allows your team to consume 20% less stamina when sprinting, which also counts for dodging. After looking at his kit, it's pretty clear to me that he is like a sub DPS buffer. So he's designed to do damage like almost a hybrid DPS, because he can infuse with both his E and Q, allowing him to do 2 sources of damage like Animo plus an infused element. And as well, with this passive, it allows him to buff his teammates and increase the overall team damage. This makes Kazuha an extremely versatile and useful unit whenever you want to group up enemies, add damage to your team, or simply have a source of split damage dealing. And now we're going to go over my Kazuha, and I'm going to show you his build. You can see his base stats right here. This is not in any party. And he has a 73-140 ratio, 124 BR, and there you go. He's running a 4-piece VV, triple EM with crit substats to balance out the crit. He's running an R1 Jade Cutter for the crit rate boost and the additional HP scaling to his attack. And as mentioned before, he is C6 triple crown. Now it's important to note that although my Kazuha has 714 EM, as you will see in the Constellation section, you get a boost of about 200 from his C2, which actually brings it up to about 900, which is that sweet spot of like 900 to 1000 elemental mastery. If you don't have a Jade Cutter for your Kazuha, that's fine, because that's actually a niche choice and not something I'd recommend for most people. You can also build him with a Mist Splitter if you're looking for more of a sub DPS build, but for most people, I would recommend running an Iron Sting or a Freedom Sworn, because you get the EM on the side, and most people aren't going to be building crit on their Kazuha. I just am, because mine is extremely highly invested, and I use him as sometimes a main DPS, but mostly like a sub DPS buffer. The point is that you don't need the crit. It's just a nice bonus to have after you've farmed up the elemental mastery for your Kazuha, as well as enough ER for him to function in the teams that he's in. And he's kind of a unique character. Normally I recommend several sets for characters or different builds, but I'm not going to recommend any other builds for Kazuha. You should only run him on 4-piece VV, triple EM, and that will give you the best results for your Kazuha in almost every situation. Not almost every situation, which is kind of nice because you don't have to switch his build up at all. When you swap him into different teams, he's very plug and play. And now, speaking of team, we're going to jump in the team building section. I'm going to show you a few variations of teams and talk about how they're supposed to work. All right, so first up we have Mona, Bennett, Kazuha, and Zhongling. This is sort of a burst-centered vape team where you basically just cycle bursts between everyone and you swirl Hydro and Pyro and do a bunch of damage. Note that my Benny and Mona are actually pretty poorly built, so this team is very underperforming, although you'll notice that Kazuha does a bunch of damage, in large part because my Benny is C6. In this situation, having a C6 Benny when you have Kazuha actually allows you to turn Kazuha into more of a Pyro DPS or like a Pyro sub DPS, as well as maintaining his original role as a buffer, which is fantastic for like mono Pyro teams or just vape teams in general. So go ahead and check this team out. Next up, we have Raiden Shogun, Jin, Kujo-Sara, and Kazuha. This is a double Electro, double Anemo comp, and essentially what you're doing here is cycling through bursts while using Kujo-Sara to buff everyone in their respective rotation. This is overall a really fun and strong team, and yeah, nothing really special about it except that it's enjoyable. I'm going to show you the footage of it right now. Next up, we have my absolute favorite team in the entire game. So obviously I gotta showcase this team on my Kazuha video. This is Kokomi, Shenhe, Kazuha, and Chongyun. This is a freeze team where you utilize every single unit for maximum synergy. This team is very quick swampy, but Kazuha and Shenhe boosting all of the damage in the team turns it into a kind of ridiculous monster of a team. So I'm going to show you some footage of that. Note that my Shenhe is also C6 and super highly invested, and my Kokomi is super highly invested, although not C6. So you are going to see some overperformance in this team. Lastly, we have an Electrocharge team. I wanted to show a wide variety of elemental compositions for Kazuha just to showcase exactly how flexible he can be. This is a Taser team with Kokomi, Fischl, Kazuha, and Ketching. Now you're going to place the Jellyfish, place Oz, use Kazuha's rotation, go into Ketching, burst with Kokomi. It cycles very smoothly. So I find that Kazuha functions better in quick swap teams like this. We're gonna go ahead and look at the footage. Keep in mind that my catching and my fischl are kind of poorly built as well. All right, and now that we are done with the team showcases, we're going to talk about mechanics for Kazuha. Now, there isn't a lot of mechanical stuff to worry about with Kazuha, but one thing you do need to keep in mind is in regards to his Ascension talent passive. This will boost elemental damage bonus to the element absorbed by the swirl, it says. Bonuses for different elements can obtained through this method can coexist. What it's essentially saying is whatever you swirl, whatever element you swirl, you will get the damage bonus for this element. Now, what you need to keep in mind is that if you're trying to boost Hydro and Cryo, for instance, you need to have Hydro on one enemy and Cryo on another. Because if you have Hydro and Cryo on one enemy, they freeze, and the only thing you're gonna swirl is the outer layer, which is the Cryo. The Cryo. You're only gonna swirl the outer layer, which is the Cryo, not the Hydro. Same thing if you're doing like a vape team. You'll notice that in that one team showcase, I apply Hydro to the enemy with Mona, and then I apply Pyro to yourself with Kazuha or with Benny's Burst. This allows me to swirl both elements for the damage bonus. It's kind of something that you just have to get used to over time, but you just want to be mindful of what elements you're swirling to make sure you get the damage bonuses that you want. Other than that, he's extremely simple and fun to play, and I really don't have much other mechanical advice for you. One thing to keep in mind is that the reason why triple EM is so good for him is because he can boost his own elemental damage with this passive. So stacking EM on him allows you to, like, for instance, boost his pyro damage if you're running with Benny C6, or boost his cryo damage if you're running with Shenhe and Chongyun, to allow him to turn into a cryo or pyro or whatever sub DPS. All right, enough about that. We're gonna go into his constellations, which are juicy. The first constellation, C1, decreases the cooldown of his elemental skill by 10%, and using his burst will reset the cooldown of his skill entirely. This is how I'm able to do the skill burst skill combo that you see commonly in the showcases that I have. You can also achieve this similarly though with a sacrificial sword if you're able to bump up his elemental mastery enough with substat. His C2 is arguably one of his best constellations. After using his burst, Kazuha's own elemental mastery will increase by 200, and whatever characters within the field will also have their elemental mastery increase by 200. When it says down here about it not stacking is just for Kazuha, because he gets the 200 boost regardless. He will not get a 400 boost if he is on the field with the C2. Kazuha C4 is kind of interesting. When he has less than 45 energy, he obtains the following effects. Pressing or holding the elemental skill will regenerate 3 or 4 energy for him respectively. And when gliding, you will regenerate 2 energy per second. This allows you to gain energy out of combat without ever hitting an enemy, which is kind of interesting because you can always enter combat with a nearly full burst for Kazuha, as long as you have the C4. This also allows him to generate extra energy from using his skill when his energy is low. And for this reason, it allows you to avoid building a lot of energy recharge on him, and you won't have any issues getting his burst up pretty consistently. Finally, his C6 allows for him to have an animal infusion after using his burst or skill for 5 seconds, and every point of elemental mastery will increase his normal, charged, and plunging attack damage by 0.2%. Now, what I will say about this is that everyone thinks it's going to turn Kazuha into a main DPS. This actually turns Kazuha into just a more reliable swirler, sub DPS, and it can increase the amount of field time that he has. One thing that they do not say in this constellation is that this damage bonus does not only apply to the Anemo infusion. The elemental mastery damage bonus applies to all normal charged and plunging attacks, regardless of infusion. So if you are doing pyro damage or cryo damage, in terms of like a Benny C6 or Chongyun situation, then you still get the damage bonus even if you have overridden his Anemo infusion. I think this is really important for people to know. I think a lot of people think this is kind of wasted if you have Benny C6, or like you don't get the damage bonus if you use Chongyun, but that's simply not true. This constellation is absolutely wonderful no matter what team comp he is in, and in fact, it makes him with Benny C6 kind of disgusting. That's gonna wrap up his constellation tree. In brief, for most people, I would say C2 is the perfect stopping point because it'll allow him to function in his sub DPS buffer role to the maximum capability. If you just want to go ham on him, you can go all the way up to C6, but I really do feel like if you want to go for the most power with the least amount of spending, you want to stop at C2. So yeah, that's going to wrap up this video. I really appreciate you all being here, looking at it, checking it out. I love Kazuha. I've mained him for a long time, and he's honestly my favorite unit in the whole game. His lore and backstory is not only super great, but he is a flexible unit that is capable of doing many things that your teams require. He's a great pickup for almost anyone, free to play to whale, and yeah, I could gush about him forever. If you enjoyed this video and you would like to see more from me, make sure to hit that subscribe, like button, all that good stuff. I have a Discord. I'll have the link pinned in the comments as well as in my description, and I would love to see you there. If you are super excited for Kazuha and his eventual rerun, go ahead and drop a comment down below. Let me know whether you are planning on getting him or not, if this video is helpful or not. And as always, stay healthy, stay hydrated. Peace, everybody.